get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, I might grab a bat, I don't know. My wrath, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show. So have you ever felt betrayed?
Thank you, sir.
All right, and good afternoon, Mr. King.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
Ben King,
And Mr. King, can you briefly tell us where you're from?
London, central London.
And can you tell us a little bit about your background? What's your occupation?
I'm a house manager, a personal assistant presently with an individual who also lives in central London.
Okay. Can you lean into the microphone a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
It's a-
Sorry, here we go.
Now, did you say you're a house manager?
That's right, personal assistant, house manager.
And can you just tell those of us in the courtroom who aren't familiar, what does that mean?
I work presently for a gentleman who's in the entertainment industry, and I manage his property, a large apartment in central London, take care of the daily needs and running of that, oversight of the staff, and traveling with him when needed and things like that.
And how long have you been in this occupation?
Since about 1991, I started in private services, if you like, in house management, in butlering, in all that stuff.
Typically based around London?
Correct. I started work in London. It was my first big job at Buckingham Palace, funnily enough, for 4 years, and then I continued in different positions, full-time and self-employed, freelance capacity for many years as well.
Okay. Just generally, can you tell us, and without getting into any specifics, but what type of people would you say you typically provide these services for?
Generally high net worth people, individuals or families, residences.
Okay. Are you familiar with the plaintiff in this case, Johnny Depp?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
And how are you familiar with Mr. Depp?
I met and worked for Mr. Depp in 2014 and subsequently a couple of times after that.
Okay, and can you briefly just explain to the jury how it came to be that you were working for Mr. Depp?
Sure. Yes, at that point I was working in a freelance self-employed capacity. A lot of my jobs came through friends of friends, personal recommendations, etc. And I was asked by a friend of a friend on this occasion, would I be available, to go and manage a property where Mr. Depp was going to be staying for about a month in central London. Was I available? Would I be willing to do it? And I was available at that point. And so I said, yes, yeah, absolutely.
And just to make sure we're on the same page, what time frame are we talking about here?
That was August 2014.
Okay. And did you in fact end up working for Mr. Depp in that time frame?
I did, yes.
Now, just to clarify, were you employed by Mr. Depp?
No.
So who was your employer?
I was paid through a large hotel which was close by to the house, who also, they provided the housekeeper who was working with us for that month as well. So I was paid through them.
Okay. Can you just generally explain to us what kind of work you were doing for Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard in this time frame?
Sure, yeah, it was the setup of the house, basically. Setting up the house initially, which meant ahead of the principals arriving, which meant making sure all the linens were in place for the bedrooms. It was a sizable property, and just organizing everything ahead of their arrival. Once they arrived, it was the management of that property, the oversight of it, and the day-to-day running, some service, like butler service and managing the housekeeper day to day through that whole month.
And when you refer to the principals, who are you referring to?
Mr. Depp and Miss Heard.
Where exactly were you working in London at this point? Just kind of describe for us the house.
This was in Mayfair. It was a large townhouse in an old building, but it was very contemporary inside, modern, furnished, very modern sort of way. Quite spacious, maybe 4 or 5 bedrooms, I think. A small indoor pool, a small gym. Quite an open plan layout throughout the house.
And how long were they there?
For the month, essentially, yes.
Okay. Can you tell us just generally what hours you would typically work in a day while you were working for them in London in this time frame?
Yeah, approximately. It depended on what was going on, but I mean, generally 7 or 8 in the morning till 7 or 8 in the evening, typically. There was a chef employed as well. Russell, brilliant chef. He tended to stay after I left in the evening. He would cook dinner, serve dinner, and thankfully cleaned up after dinner, so I could leave sort of early to mid-evening, usually most days. Unless we had guests, unless there were guests or other things going on.
During your time managing the house for Mr. Depp and Miss Heard in 2014, did you have occasion to observe the interactions between Mr. Depp and Miss Heard?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
How often?
Most daily, I would say. Pretty much most days through that period.
And did you yourself interact with Mr. Depp and Miss Heard?
Yes, also daily, I would say.
Which of them would you say, or did you see one of them more often than the other?
Miss Heard was there. Mr. Depp was, the reason I think they rented the house was because Mr. Depp was working at a studio. I think it was Mordecai, the movie. So Miss Heard was there at the house most of the days. Mr. Depp often went to work and came back later on in that evening, that day.
How would you generally describe the interactions that you observed between Mr. Depp and Miss Heard?
Initially, very sort of loving towards each other, nice couple. Mr. Depp was always a gentleman and keen to make sure Miss Heard was taken care of, anything she needed, often pour a glass of wine for her. Just nice, pleasant.
How about your own interactions with the couple? How did you get along with them both?
I think very well. They were really open to me, and I mean, my background's quite formal, so it was quite an informal setting. I was able to ask questions to either of them. Miss Heard especially, it was really helpful to get information about what time they wanted dinner, basic stuff like that, or anything. It was good interaction all the time with the both of them.
Okay. Now you mentioned wine. Can you tell us to what extent did you observe either of them consume alcohol over the course of these 4 weeks?
Sure. When I started that job, or when I was taking that job on, I was told, I think by Mr. Depp's assistant, that he was. Oh, sorry.
Can you answer without telling what you were told?
I was made aware that Mr. Depp was.
Could you put your microphone on?
Okay.
Same objection. He's explaining what he's been told. Now he just said I was informed.
I don't think it's offered for the truth, Your Honor. I think it's just offered to explain his own behavior towards the couple.
No, can we approach?
Okay.
All right, so Mr. King,
Yes.
moving past the conversation, let's
Right.
not touch on that. But just in general, can you describe the alcohol consumption that you personally observed and what you personally witnessed?
Sure. I didn't see Mr. Depp consume any alcohol during that time in London. There was a large consignment of wine that had been delivered to the house at the start of the visit. Many cases that I had to find a place to store. And generally speaking, on a day-to-day, about 1 or 2 bottles of red wine were consumed per day. I think that's fair to say.
Did you ever observe Mr. Depp drink any of the wine?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever observe Ms. Heard drink any of the wine?
Yes, I did.
Regularly?
Daily.
Now, I think you already testified that you observed interactions with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard, and you generally found them to be friendly. Is that fair?
Very much so, yes.
Were there any exceptions to that?
Towards me?
I'll rephrase.
Okay.
Did you ever observe any arguments between the two?
Yes, I did.
I'll allow it. That's fine. Go ahead.
You can answer.
Oh, yes, I did, yeah.
Okay, and can you describe for us the arguments that you observed?
I can describe 2 of them, certainly. There were a few arguments on that during that month.
Let's just start with those 2.
Okay. The first one I remember was an evening. Actually, they were both the ones I recall and I was close to, were evenings. This first particular evening, the couple were due to go out for dinner, I guess. I know the car was waiting in the little courtyard there, ready for them to go, and security were waiting to take them. I was waiting to see them out into the car. I was at the foot of on the ground floor level, to wait to see them out, essentially. And the first thing I heard was Miss Heard shouting upstairs in the master suite where they were getting ready to leave. I heard her shout something, I don't recall what. I was in the vicinity, I wasn't really there to listen. And I heard footsteps, loud footsteps, sort of going across. There's like a corridor, if you like, at the top of those stairs that went around the master suite. Loud footsteps, and then more footsteps following, more shouting. And that sort of went on for some time. I mean, I knew that what time they needed to leave. I don't recall what time that was, but I knew they were supposed to have left already. And it went on for a bit.
Do you recall how that first fight or argument resolved?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I know that they left eventually, albeit late. I don't know how it really resolved, as I sort of made myself busy, but not going too far away from the door to make sure I saw them out.
All right, and then what about the second argument that you mentioned?
Second one, I was pretty much in the same vicinity, the same room on the ground floor. Again, the couple were in the TV room, I think, which was off the main sitting room, early evening, and I was going about my early evening duties, replenishing drinks close by, lighting the fire, lighting candles, whatever it might have been. I was close enough to hear Miss Heard say, "Why did you take your hand away from me, Johnny? Don't you love me anymore?" Like, not in a playful way, I might add. And I think he replied, "Of course I do, don't be silly. Of course I do." And it kind of launched from that point. And at one point, Mr. Depp got up and went to the bathroom or went upstairs, and I was sort of scuttling around out of the way because I wasn't there listening. I was just there doing my stuff in and around them. Yeah, it was a strange, sort of banal way to start an argument, but...
How would you describe Miss Heard's tone when she said, "Why did you take your hand away, Johnny?"
Accusatory, spoiled teenage child, maybe. Is that fair? Pretty, not playfully, let's put it that way, more angrily.
Over the course of the 4 weeks in August and September 2014, when you were working with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard in London,
Yes.
Did you ever observe any physical violence of any kind between the two of them?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever observe any injuries on either one of them?
No, neither of them.
Okay. After those 4 weeks, did you ever work for Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard again?
I did. A couple of occasions. The following year was the first one. The following spring.
Okay, and where was that?
In Australia.
And what is it? Was it unusual for you to be in Australia?
In Australia, maybe, but not unusual for me to travel for clients for my assignments to wherever it was needed.
Okay. How exactly did it come about that you were in Australia with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Towards the end of the London visit, Mr. Depp had kindly said, thanks so much for looking after us. We really like you. Maybe if you're free next year and we can arrange it, we can make it happen. Perhaps you'll be able to come to Australia with us. I've got to film Pirates 5. So I said, great, I'd love to. Obviously, I was freelance at the time, so it was going to be about 4 months' work. I think it was billed as. So I thought, yes, I wouldn't mind some of that. Thank you very much.
And where in Australia were you staying?
There's a Gold Coast. Yeah, it's a Brisbane area. Brisbane was the main airport, so it's about an hour's drive south of Brisbane.
Okay. And do you recall when you arrived?
I arrived on February the 4th. I know I flew on that day.
Okay. How did your job responsibilities in Australia compare to your job responsibilities in London?
Much the same, just on a bigger scale. The house was larger. There was a bit more setup to do. But essentially the same oversight of the house, responsible for it during the whole gig.
And were you employed by Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard?
No.
Who were you employed by?
Essentially by Disney, the production company affiliated with Disney, who were making the movie. I think their name was Herschel, was the production company.
Okay. Now, I think you said you arrived in Australia on February 4th, 2015?
Correct.
Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. How about Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard? When did they arrive?
The setup for us was about a few weeks. I think they arrived towards the end of February 2015.
And between your arrival and their arrival, what had you been doing?
Just setting up the house. I lived on site. There was a guest house on site, a 2-bedroom, single-story guest house that I stayed in for those first couple of weeks, setting up the house and just getting everything ready during that time. And then I moved out to apartments, which we all had. A lot of the crew, the chef had an apartment. We all had apartments about a 30-minute drive south of the house.
Okay. And so we're talking about this house in Australia. So
Yes.
Can you kind of describe that property to us?
Yes, it was a large house on a few acres of land. A 3-story house, 5 bedrooms, with 2 or 3 buildings within the grounds as well. A good sized house, beautiful location.
How many entrances would you say it had?
Entrances, many. Many certainly on the lower ground level out to the garden. On the first or on the main floor level, there was many entrances. Every room in that house had a balcony at least. Every room on the lower ground floor had a sliding door or a door out. The utility room, the garage, the gym, everything. Obviously the front door. Many. On the main level, the large glass sliding doors out to the pool area, which had a gazebo and steps down to the ground.
Okay, and once Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard arrived to stay at this house, was anybody else staying in the house?
Staying in the house, no.
Was anybody else staying on the grounds?
On the property, yes. I mean, there was a couple there, caretaking couple, Sean and his wife, Sandra, who worked for the owner of the house. They lived on site essentially all the time. They were there pretty much throughout. And their house was, whatever, a couple of 100 yards away from the main house. And yes, security were there also.
All right, sticking with the caretaker just briefly, about how long would you estimate it would take to walk from the main house to the caretaker's house?
Under 5 minutes. I mean, yeah, no more than 5 minutes.
Okay. And then you mentioned security. What was the security setup?
Security was set up by Jerry Judge. They were employed. They stayed in the grounds for the duration. They didn't come into the house. They had a little sort of shack round by the perimeter wall, where they would start their patrols from, walk around the grounds around the exterior of the house at certain times of the day, write their reports, and go back and stay in their shack.
And how many security guards would be on site at any particular time?
I think one in the day and one in the night, so they did sort of 12 hours about, as I remember it.
But it was 24/7?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Do you know whether those were local employees or were they regularly employed?
I believe they were Australian, yes.
Okay. Now, I think you said you were not on the property 24/7, right? You had an apartment elsewhere?
Correct, yeah. I kept the same hours as I did in London, essentially. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, not quite, but 7, 8 a.m. till evening, till everything was set up and I could leave.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity when you were in Australia to observe Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard's interactions with each other?
Yes, of course.
And how would you describe them?
Initially very good, like in London. It seemed very pleasant towards each other.
Did you observe any arguments?
Yes. I had several.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes. A similar pattern, it seemed, to London arguments. One in particular was very similar to the second one in London. Started in the TV room, funnily enough. Loud voices, and Mr. Depp leaving the room, shutting the door, going to another room to play his guitar or to a bathroom, whatever. And Miss Heard closely following and opening the door or certainly rapping on the door. It seemed to continue.
Give us an estimate about how many arguments you think you observed in this time frame, approximately?
Several. I mean, we were there for several months, so certainly many more than in London.
Did you observe any alcohol consumption in Australia by either of them?
Yes, again, Ms. Heard, I was, again, part of my responsibilities was to provision the house and have everything set up for that. So I regularly brought red wine for Miss Heard, which she consumed, the same amount as in London, I think.
And what amount is that?
Generally speaking, 1 or 2 bottles a day.
Okay. Did you ever observe Mr. Depp start any arguments with Ms. Heard?
No.
Oh, so hold on, objection.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, could you put your mic? There we go.
Leading, objection, leading.
I'll sustain this to leading if you want.
Okay, we can move on.
New question.
Do you remember anything about Friday, March 6th, 2015?
It was essentially a normal Friday, if you like. End of the week. Yay. Nothing extraordinary about that day.
Did you come into work that day?
Yes, yeah, I was there.
Okay. Do you recall about what time you would have left the house on that date?
I remember taking a photo of the beautiful sunset over the pool. The sun would set over the pool and the creek. I took a photo of that around early evening, so 6:37. I would think I wouldn't have left much later than that.
Was Mr. Depp there when you left?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Depp was at the studio still on that day. I can't remember sort of seeing him to say goodbye. No, have a good weekend.
How about Miss Heard? Do you recall if she was there when you left?
Yes, she was.
Did anything unusual happen that weekend?
Yeah, I would say something pretty unusual happened.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I can.
Foundation.
All right, foundation. You want to lay a foundation?
At some point, did you become aware that something had happened between
Yes.
Mr. Depp and Miss
To the
Heard?
extent it calls for hearsay.
All right. I'll sustain that objection.
All right, turning to the following Sunday.
Just notice how much more do you have? Because it's time for our afternoon break. If
I think we can. I have a little bit more, Your Honor, so I think maybe this could be a good time for a break.
All right, let's go ahead and take our afternoon 15-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. Again, do not talk to anybody about the case and don't do any